that advice led to the worst obesity epidemic and diabetes epidemic in the history of mankind.
Diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease, the big killers
are by sugar and food.
Yes.
This video will give you the key nutritional tips to living longer and staying healthy. This is Dr. Mark Hyman.
And then, of course, there's the social issues. People don't understand that the quality of the food we eat, the processed food, the refined oils, the sugars, the chemicals, the additives, affect behavior. We know, for example, Lewis, that in prisons, if you give people a healthy diet in prisons, they will reduce violent crime in the prison by 56%. If you add a vitamin supplement, it goes down by 80% because they're all nutritionally depleted. I mean, I had a patient, not a patient, he was a guy who was in jail, he was a murderer. He wrote me a handwritten letter years ago. He said, I followed your program in jail. I realized I was a murderer. My behavior was so violent my whole life. And when I changed my diet, I became a completely different person. I realized it was what I was eating. And now I'm so thankful for having my life back.
So you think our diet also determines our behavior?
Absolutely. There's clear evidence about that. I was just reading a study the other day that showed that people who eat a lot of carbohydrates and sugars and starches have much more violent behavior. We know that people who eat refined oils, which we now have 10% of these as our calories from soybean oil. It's in everything. It's not necessarily we put it in our food. It's in every packaged processed food. That has led to increase in homicides and violence and suicides around the world. And we've gotten higher on these refined omega-6s and low on omega-3s. So the evidence of how it affects behavior, mood, poverty, it keeps poor communities down. And then the food industry targets these communities disproportionately. So you have all these things happening at the same time. And then kids can't learn in school because they're eating Doritos and Coke and they can't actually focus and learn, and their behavior's all erratic and they're on these chemicals which alter their behavior. That's why, 1 out of 6 kids has some neurodevelopmental problem, which is enormous, right? ADD now affects 1 out of 10 kids. I think 14% of kids have ADD, and about 1 in 10 kids are on medication.
Do you think ADD can be removed if we have a better diet, or is that something?
Absolutely,
like the brain or
no, absolutely no. It's not a brain problem. It's a body problem, and the body problem is caused by our diet and by environmental toxins. And I've had hundreds of ADD patients who've transformed their lives. I mean, I just, we were talking about the Broken Brain documentary series I did. I had a guy, I was in a New York Russian bathhouse the other day, and this guy comes in, I saw your series, I've been on ADD medication my whole life, and it helped me get off my medication. I mean, we see this. So you've got health, you've got the economy, you've got social justice and poverty issues, you've got climate, you've got environment, you've got education. It's all connected. And the issue is that most people don't connect the dots, number one, and most people don't realize that we're in this situation because of money in the food system that's driving our policies.
Right. You were mentioning how there's some press hits that you do. I won't mention who, but that would say you can't talk about certain things because of a sponsor that's funding the program.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So you can't talk negative about one brand or one product or because of that. Yeah.
That's right. I was told, well, you can't cover this subject because we get our funding from this sponsor. I can tell you a story from the past because the show's not on the air anymore. Sure. It was the Martha Stewart show. And I was on the show, and we were working with a producer, and we were talking about getting healthy and working out and detoxing, and Martha had her trainer there. And the producer says, well, we're going to have to do a bit as part of the segment on dairy and how dairy is such a great sports recovery drink.
No way.
Yes. And so I was like, I'm just sorry to tell you, but there's all this evidence that that's not true. So I downloaded all the scientific papers documenting the science behind the fact that dairy isn't a sports drink. And he's like, I know, but we kind of have to because this spot is sponsored by the Dairy Council.
Oh my gosh.
And then if you're ever on television, you know that the experts don't get notes. They don't get cue cards. They don't get teleprompters. They have to know their stuff. Well, this woman, who was the trainer, had all these cue cards that was being held up about dairy with all the bullet points of why dairy is such a great food and sports drink. It's insidious. So we think we're getting news. We're thinking getting authentic
from
information.
Experts too. From
experts,
doctors or specialists or experts, and we are influenced by these experts.
Huge. I mean, the evidence is so clear that the industry is heavily funding science, and they're funding corrupt science. So if you look at the data, for example, artificial sweeteners, 99% of the studies done by the food industry show that they are safe. 99% of the studies on artificial sweeteners done by independent scientists find that they're not safe. if your industry funds a study, they're 8 to 50 times more likely to find a positive benefit for their product.
Right, of course.
Right? Whereas you look at, and then you look at the American Heart Association, the American Diabetic Association, the American Nutrition Dietetic Association. These are all funded by the food industry. I mean, if you look, it's Coca-Cola, it's Pepsi, it's Cargill. It's frightening to see how much money is. You have Trix cereal for kids as a heart-healthy cereal. Cocoa Puffs, Lucky Charms. I mean, Trix has 7 teaspoons of sugar. Red dye, blue dye, yellow dye, you die.
Yeah, right.
Like it's all in there, and it's a heart-healthy food. Why? Because they get $300,000 for every time they put that check on a box.
No way.
Yes, way. And this is happening globally. Globally, I mean, there's a huge battle going on in Malaysia now, because Nestle has promoted this drink called Milo, which I never heard about, but it's a big drink in the developing world and in Asia and South America. And it's basically like Ovaltine. It's basically a malted beverage with sugar that has the same glycemic index as Coca-Cola. And they have athletes on there and sports characters and how it's a great drink for health. And they had this commercial, which I saw, which was a Filipino rock star singing this great, rap song about how everybody who's a kid has an energy gap. 4 out of 5 kids have this thing called an energy gap. I was at a medical conference.
What's an energy gap mean?
I was at a medical conference of 1,500 doctors. I said, has anybody here heard of an energy gap that 4 out of 5 kids have? No, they completely made this up. And they say these kids need Milo for the energy gap.
No way.
Yeah, and this guy who lives over in Malaysia called them out on this, and they came out with this huge propaganda campaign against him to discredit him and manipulating the facts and lying. And I was just watching this whole thing. It's unbelievable. So it's not an accident that we're in this situation.
Wow, the manipulation, yeah. Mm-hmm. And do you think that all inflammation, chronic pain, and disease can be eliminated from the foods we eat, or is caused by foods? Besides having like a car accident or something.
Yeah, I'm a functional medicine doctor. Run the Center for Functional Medicine at Cleveland Clinic, and so we look at the root causes of disease, and there are many. Right? There's environment, there's lifestyle, there's genetics. All affect these various systems in your body. Right? So we always say there's 5 causes of all disease, based on how they influence your genetics and combine with your lifestyle. Toxins, so environmental toxins, that's not your fault. That's just the fact that we put 80,000 chemicals in the environment without testing them. We have 3,000 food additives we eat every year as Americans, about 3 to 5 pounds of it, which is frightening. And there are heavy metals and pesticides everywhere. So we're exposed to a lot of toxins, and they make people sick. Infections, which we can get, whether it's viral infections and bacterial infections, Lyme disease, tick infections, allergens, which are increasingly common, or food sensitivities, things where your body's creating an immune response, whether it's gluten or dairy, those are big. And then poor diet and stress. All of those are contributing to disease. But by far, the biggest cause is food. Really? By far. And it affects, what's amazing is it's not just like a little bit. It's like people say, oh, my migraines or my arthritis or my irritable bowel. People don't connect the dots between how they feel and the food they're eating. And then when you switch, people have transformations very quickly.
Yeah. They notice it quickly.
Quickly, yeah.
And pain goes away, the weight goes off, all these things.
Yeah, I always say food is medicine. It's not just like a medicine. It works faster, better, and cheaper than almost any drug. We have people who are off insulin, who are type 2 diabetics, within a week.
Wow.
And get off all their medications. There was a huge study just published on a ketogenic diet intervention for type 2 diabetics. Now, I don't think ketogenic diets are right for everybody, but in an extreme situation where your metabolism is so broken, it can help reset things. Basically, reducing carbs to 30 grams a day, 70% fat, and health in the context of a healthy plant-rich diet. And they were able to get 100% of the people in a year over diabetics off of the main diabetes medication and 94% off insulin or dramatically lower, with an average weight loss of 30 pounds, about 12% of body weight. And this is unprecedented in the research, because food, if you know how to apply it in the right way, at the right dose for the right person, it's the most powerful drug.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing. You talked about in the book that you've been studying food for 35 years.
40 now.
40 years.
I was like, I did the math. It's 2018. I was started in 1978 in college. And I'm like that old.
Here's the thing. You've got 11 New York Times best-selling books. You've probably done how many books total?
14.
14 books. 11 New York Times, including this one, Food, What the Heck Should I Eat? And for 40 years, you've been studying food, and you say even the experts are confused by the science.
They are. They are.
So how come
How come I figured it out?
you know all the answers?
I don't think
after 40 years.
Yeah, I don't think I know all the answers, but I don't have a bone to pick.
Yeah.
In other words, I haven't spent my life dedicated to the low-fat diet. I haven't been dedicated my life to
paleo,
veganism. I mean, I'm looking at like what works. And the other thing I know is that I'm not an academic. Well, I do research, but that's not how I started. I'm a practicing doctor. So what's happened over the years is the latest thing comes in, I try it, see what happens to the patient. So seeing tens of thousands of patients, doing thousands and thousands of lab tests over the years, seeing what happens when people change their diet and how their biology responds, that's the best laboratory you'll ever see.
Right.
And I even noticed it myself. I was a vegetarian for 10 years, and I see pictures of myself when I was 28, and I am so scrawny, even though I ate really healthy. I ran 5 miles a day, I did yoga all the time, and I look at myself now doing far less exercise, and I'm far more muscular and have more muscle mass than I did when I was 28 because I learned how to change my diet. And we know that the right kind of high fat diet and adequate protein actually increases muscle mass.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I literally just got off the phone with a friend who says, I went on a vegan diet, and 3 days into it, like, I can't lift anymore.
Yeah, but then you see some athletes that are all vegan who have like gained muscle mass and gained strength, and you're like, well, what is the
Maybe
answer?
they're taking steroids. I don't know.
Who knows? Do you think living a vegetarian or vegan, fully vegan or vegetarian lifestyle, that it's hard to gain muscle mass?
I think it's hard. It's hard. It's not impossible. I mean, if you really work at it and really work out, and there are great vegan athletes out there, but there's never been a historically voluntary vegan society ever. And when you look at
Really?
Yes, and
When
when
you
you look
blue
at
zones or
no, they were never exclusively vegan.
Really?
Right? They always had some animal food, right?
it.
The Kanawans,
fish or something.
Yeah, and as hunter-gatherers, we ate 800 species of plants, so we had a very plant-rich diet. But we also included wild animals when we could catch them.
Right, exactly.
And so it's part of our evolutionary history, and our bodies are well adapted. And the protein in vegetables is different. So, for example, there's something called leucine, which is an amino acid that is the rate-limiting amino acid for muscle synthesis. In other words, in order to build muscle, you need this amino acid. And it's very low in plant proteins, very high in animal proteins.
Right.
So
why not just live a plant-based diet and then have the supplements?
you could.
And
You could. And I have patients who are vegans, monks. I mean, I'm not going to force people not to eat it, but it's much harder to do, and you have to know what you're doing. And I see people over time, initially, when they switch from a processed American diet to a whole foods vegan diet, they're going to get so much better.
Of
right?
course, yeah.
But the real issue is compared to what?
Right.
Right? What we really need to do is, and they've looked at over time, these big studies looking at animal and plant proteins and stuff over time, looking at what people do. And there's a vegan, vegetarian, omnivore study, which was 245,000 people. It was an observational study, but they didn't find any difference in outcomes. Another study, 42-country study, looking at food pattern consumption over long periods of time, showed actually the people who had animal fat and protein did far better than people who focused on cereal grains in their diet, less heart disease. Another study, the PURE study, just came out recently, 135,000 people. It was 5 continents, I think 18 countries, 10 years. And there was actually an improvement when people had more saturated fat and more good fats and less cereal grains and more animal protein.
More animal protein or
More
animal protein, yeah.
It was not a risk factor.
Right.
Now, these are difficult studies to interpret sometimes because they're observational, but you look at interventional studies where you intervene by giving people high-fat protein diets with lots of plant foods, people do better metabolically. So,
really?
Yeah, and it's very hard to eat a low glycemic diet if you're a vegan. You can, but it's very hard. I have a friend who's a keto vegan, and she's a type 1 diabetic, and she's rocking it. But you have to know what you're doing.
You have to be so disciplined.
Yeah, super disciplined, super smart about it.
That's challenging.
Yeah. So I think and the data on meat, honestly, which I go into the book in great detail, is confusing for people because there's issues.
So it depends on the factors of the meat.
Yeah,
where you get it, the environment it's in, how it's fed, how it's raised, the stress of it.
Right. Exactly.
How it's processed, everything, right?
Totally, right. So, people go, we shouldn't be eating meat because it's bad for the animals, bad for the environment.
Right.
Yes, we should not be eating factory farm meat. This is really bad. It's bad for the animals, it's bad for the planet, it's bad for us because the quality of the meat is very poor. But let's say a wild elk or a grass-finished bison or even cow, very different. And it turns out that these animals actually have higher levels of omega-3 fats and higher levels of antioxidants and minerals and nutrients and beneficial fats and actually are a great source of protein and don't have the harm that we think they do. When you look at the studies that showed there was harm, the reason they show that is because when you do a study, observational study, you give people a questionnaire every year. So you take 10,000 people, 100,000 people, and every year you give them a questionnaire. What'd you eat? What'd you eat last week? What'd you know, if you can remember. And people answer according to what they think they should answer a lot of times, right? So if meat is bad, they're going to underestimate the amount of meat they're eating. So during the time of these studies, meat was considered bad. So people who ate meat didn't really care about their health. So they smoke, and the data show it. When you look at the factors of these people, their characteristics, which you can read in the studies, which I read, they were overweight, they smoked, they drank, they didn't eat fruits and vegetables, they didn't exercise, they didn't take vitamins, they ate more processed food, more sugar. Of course they were sicker.
Essentially what you're saying is completely opposite of what we've been all told our whole lives, right? Why fat is the key to sustained weight loss.
Yeah,
who would have health.
Who would have thunk it, right?
Aren't we not supposed to have fat in our diet? Isn't it bad for us? Doesn't it create heart disease and high cholesterol and all these other things that are bad for us? Or is it actually...
That's what we were all taught, right? That's the whole line. Our government told us to eat 6 to 11 servings of red rice, cereal, and pasta today, to eat a low-fat diet. And fats and oils were sparingly only at the top supposed to be eaten. And yet that advice led to the worst obesity epidemic and diabetes epidemic in the history of mankind.
That's like the food charts that we all saw in school, right?
Completely opposite of what we should be doing.
No,
and so the science has caught up with this bad advice. And the advice, unfortunately, Lewis, was based on really shoddy science, on very weak evidence, on a few population studies, not really experimental studies. In fact, all the experimental studies that told us to eat low-fat diets, they actually didn't tell us that we should be doing that. They were actually contradicting the recommendations that were developed in 1980 by the UK and the USA.
Really?
So basically, if you looked at the actual randomized controlled trials there weren't that many, but there was a few of them, they all said that eating low-fat wasn't beneficial. But the
these were outside of the U.S. trials.
No, trials all over. Trials in the U.S.
Okay.
They just didn't look at that evidence. So the guideline committees who were working on it they sort of dismissed that evidence, and they had this theory, and they went with the theory, but because it made sense, right? If you look at calories, for example, fat has 9 calories per gram, carbs and protein have 4 calories per gram. So you think, well, gee, if it has more calories per gram, if you eat less of it, you're going to lose more weight. It's logical, but unfortunately, metabolism is not a math problem. You know, it's a metabolic problem. It's a hormonal problem. It's not energy balance. The whole idea of calories in, calories out. This is the biggest crock of what that's been pushed on the American public, because there's a message implicit in that, which is if you just told someone to lose weight by eating less and exercising more, if they don't do it, it's their fault, right? Just eat less, exercise more. And if you don't, you're a lazy glutton, right? So it's your fault you're fat.
Okay.
Right? But the truth is that it's not. It's not just about calorie balance. In fact, that's what the Global Energy Balance, quote, Global Energy Balance Network, which was actually funded by Coca-Cola, and they actually funded university scientists to kind of be the front people for this nonsense that's all about calories in, calories out, has been completely discredited. The New York Times wrote a big expose of this, but what we've been taught is that all calories are the same. They're actually not. So food is not just energy, it's actually information. It gives instructions, right? So this is like a big breakthrough in science, right? So food is not just calories, it's actually information. So the information in food communicates with your body every single minute. So every bite you take, it turns on or off genes that create health or disease, that make you lose or gain weight. It turns on or off hormones that make you lose or gain weight or create health or disease.
It's like a feedback for you.
It's direct instructions, and it works minute by minute. It's not something that takes a long time. It regulates inflammation. It regulates your hormones, as I said. It regulates your brain chemistry. It regulates even your gut microbiome, all the flora in your gut that we now know are linked to everything from weight gain, diabetes, to heart disease, to cancer, to autoimmune diseases, and so many other things.
It's the gut health, right?
Even depression and ADD and autism may be linked to changes in your gut flora. So we now know that when you eat food, it's not just about the energy in it. Because if that was true, then you could just survive on soda all day, and it wouldn't matter as long as you only eat 1,800 calories of soda. And I had this argument.
Right.
I had this argument with the vice chairman of Pepsi. We had dinner together, and I'm telling you.
No way.
Yeah, we had dinner. And the guy in between us because I was sitting here, you're sitting here. The guy was like being in the middle of like a war zone, and I said to him, "How can you say that? How can you say that eating 1,800 calories of soda is the same as having 1,800 calories of broccoli or almonds?"
Right.
He says, "Well, as long as you have that amount of calories, you're not gonna. It's not gonna be any different." I said, "This is just not how the body works.
You're not getting the nutritional value from that, right?
Right. I mean, it's not even nutritional. So just like look at 1,000 calories. Let's say 750 calories of broccoli is 21 cups, 35 grams of fiber, half a teaspoon of sugar, and tons of phytonutrients, phytochemicals that upregulate your genes that actually help you prevent cancer, that improve hormone metabolism. But so many things, right? Same calories from a big gulp, 750 calories, 46 teaspoons of sugar, right? High fructose corn syrup upregulates your liver to turn on a fat production factory that makes high triglycerides.
Stores fat more, right?
Stores fat, lowers triglycerides. I mean, raises triglycerides, lowers the good cholesterol, causes a fatty liver, raises hormones that make you, in women, make them grow hair on their face and have lost hair on their head. Men, they drop their testosterone. They have no sex drive and they lose their hair on their bodies. All this from the same calories, right?
The number of calories.
Calories are the same, but the information in the food is very different. So now we have this concept that is actually really about the I call it the hormonal hypothesis, which I talk about in Eat Fat, Get Thin, which is how do you change your hormones so you're not hungry all the time? Because
that's the key.
The typical advice: you eat low fat, and your fat actually makes you satisfied, right? Because if you eat fat, you're not craving all the time, you're not hungry, and it actually is a brain food because it actually stops the addiction center in the brain from turning on, so you never feel hungry or have any cravings. It also speeds up your metabolism. Fat speeds up your metabolism. Yeah,
so it helps you burn more fat.
Helps you burn more fat. It releases fat from the fat cells.
Interesting.
Right. So it makes you less hungry. It makes you burn more fat, and it liberates the fat from the fat cell. So it's really powerful. Whereas if you eat sugar, the opposite happens. You get hungrier because you increase insulin. You drop when you.
I used to have so much sugar.
It's terrible.
I was addicted to it.
All of us were. I mean, I was too. I was a vegetarian. I eat like tons of whole wheat bread and sugar and honey and everything. Grape nuts and ice cream for breakfast.
That was my life, right? So when did you stop? When did the research become known, or the facts or the data become known?
It's not even. It's honest. That's why I wrote this book.
Because you're a doctor and you were eating sugar.
No, it's not even.
When did you start to realize, and when did this information about fat become?
Well, it's been mounting for decades, right? So it's building on a mountain of evidence. And in the book, I reviewed over 1,000 studies, or 500 quoted in the book that I referenced. They wouldn't let me put more because there was no room in the back of the book.
Yeah.
And it's all well documented, and the science of this is very powerful. One of my colleagues, David Ludwig, wrote a book called Always Hungry. He's a Harvard professor, and he's done a lot of the research that this is based on, where he gave two groups of people same calories, but changed the percents of fat and carbs. And it was a very well-controlled study. And in the first group, they had 60% carbs, 20% fat, 20% protein. The other group switched it, 60% fat, 20% carbs, 20% protein. So it's the opposite. And the group that had the high-fat diet burned 300 calories more a day by doing nothing else.
Really? Just by having more fat?
By eating more fat. Their metabolism sped up 300 calories a day. It's like running.
Same amount of calories, though.
They ate the same amount of calories in.
But they burned 300 more.
Right, because their metabolism sped up.
Interesting.
Right. So in other words, it's like running an hour a day without getting off the couch.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah. That's powerful.
Very powerful.
Yeah, and I know for me, as I've seen myself and my patients, the transformation's amazing, and their cholesterol gets better. It's totally contradictory.
Yeah.
Right? Fat is supposed to raise your cholesterol. Right? Eating cholesterol is supposed to raise your cholesterol. But for the first time since the dietary guidelines came out in 1980, the U.S. government in 2015 completely reversed their stance on fat. There's no more restriction. Like first week of January 2016.
This year. Like a few weeks ago. They just changed this.
They changed this completely.
The whole guide.
Completely. So first time they said, forget about fat. You can eat as much as you want. No limit on fat.
This is the government,
The government, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee established these recommendations. This is a scientific group that establishes guidelines for the government, helps them shape policy, and then the government makes the policy. They kind of
based around this research or this.
Yeah, they said, don't worry about fat, don't worry about cholesterol. Eggs are back, right? Eggs are back. Forget about the egg white omelets. Just eat the whole egg.
No way.
Completely. And they said it made me laugh. They said cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern. Quote, nutrient of concern. Like, well, we got it wrong for 35 years.
No way.
Yeah.
So it's like...
It's totally different. And they also said that we should, for the first time, they said we should reduce sugar. Now, the policy advisors, who are the scientists, said we should limit sugar-sweetened beverages because they're proven to be linked to obesity and diabetes. But the government, because of the food lobby, changed the wording to say, no, we should be restricting added sugar. So we should eat less added sugars. Now, what's an added sugar? It doesn't say added sugar on the label.
Right.
So how do you know? Because the food labeling from the FDA is also influenced by the food lobby.
Right.
So it should say added sugar on the label, not just sugar. Right. So you don't know.
Right. Interesting.
So it's designed to totally confuse people. But the truth is that this is a huge advance, and now we actually have come to realize that this is not true. So the science around fat and how your body burns fat and what makes you fat is all really clear now. And it's all based on this hormone idea of insulin, which is a fat storage hormone.
Yes.
So anything you eat that increases insulin, which is sugar, refined flour. I mean, white flour raises your blood sugar more than table sugar. So if you had 2 slices of white bread, it raises your blood sugar more than a tablespoon of table sugar. You're like, I'm eating whole wheat bread. It's just as bad. Unless the bread is so dense that you can stand on it without it squishing, then you shouldn't eat it.
Shouldn't eat it.
No, like the German rye bread.
I love bread, though.
Yeah, everybody
That's a
loves
challenge.
bread. Now, the bread we eat isn't the bread we ate, right? So our ancestors ate very different bread.
It's not the hard bread.
It was very coarse, and we only had the grain mills that started in the 1800s. Before that, we couldn't eat refined grain, and now even whole wheat is super refined. It's just,
And are all grains bad as well, in your opinion?
No, I don't think all grains are bad. I joke. I say, in the book, I talk about, an induction plan, like basically a way to get quick start to change you from like just being storing fat to burning fat to eating fat to makes you thin. And that's a 21-day plan. And after that, I talk about how you transition to what I call a pegan diet. Pegan, as opposed to paleo or vegan. It was kind of a joke because one day I was sitting
in between.
Yeah, I was sitting on a panel with 2 friends of mine. One was a vegan cardiologist, and the other was like a paleo doctor.
Sure.
And I was like, well, I don't know. I guess I must be a pegan because I'm in the middle here.
Okay. What does a pegan diet look like?
So a pegan diet, what's amazing, Louis, is that the principles of paleo vegan are often very similar. So both groups believe that we should be eating whole, unprocessed, unrefined foods.
Yes.
We should get rid of food additives,
Foods
hormones.
from the ground.
Everything. Yeah. No antibiotics, no hormones, no pesticides, no GMO. We should be having no MSG, no artificial sweeteners, no high fructose corn syrup. Everybody agrees that that's true. We also agree that everybody should be eating lots of fruits and vegetables.
Yes.
Right? A little heavy on the plant foods.
Yep.
Basic principles. Both agree that we shouldn't have dairy, which is interesting.
Yes.
Right? We'll talk about that.
Paleo, no dairy as well.
No
right?
dairy, right.
Yeah.
No dairy. No
I guess
vegan.
there's some of them that say like some specific cheeses or something.
Yeah,
or,
grass-fed butter. There's some things, but but the proteins in dairy are very inflammatory, and the dairy again we eat isn't the dairy we ate. We've hybridized our cows; it's all fertilized by one bull.
It's not organic dairy.
And it's not organic. It's not raw. It's not how our ancestors ate it. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Even organic cows, they milk them when they're pregnant, and they're just full of hormones. So,
okay.
And also, it's just not always tolerated well by many people.
Right.
And then,
what else do they both have in common?
Everybody agrees that we should be eating foods that are phytonutrient rich, that are nutrient dense, and we should be lots of nuts and seeds and lots of good oils like avocados and olive oil.
What's phytonutrient? What does that mean?
Phytonutrient is a chemical that's in plant foods. Phyto means plant, and it's not a vitamin or mineral. It's not a protein, fat, or carb or fiber. It's something else. So, for example, like broccoli has glucosinolates, which upregulates detoxification.
Okay.
Catechins are in green tea, which are powerful detoxifiers of metal, powerful antioxidants. Tomatoes have lycopene, which is a powerful cancer preventer for prostate cancer.
Okay.
Anthocyanidins. You can have black rice, which has anthocyanidins, which are powerful antioxidants that are in black rice. It's emperor's rice. Love that. It's also very low glycemic.
Sure.
So I think the things that they disagree on are basically beans, grains, and meat. Like where you get your protein from. Everything else is the same.
Paleo and vegan is the same except for meat, beans,
and protein. I mean, beans, grains, and protein.
Beans, grains, and protein. Okay.
Like, right. And I mean, meat.
Right.
And so,
Sure.
what I realize is that, I think many people who are sick do better when you take out certain things that can be inflammatory or high glycemic. So if you're, for example, carbohydrate intolerant and you're diabetic, which affects a lot of people, I talk about how do you find out if you're carbohydrate intolerant in the book, which is there's a questionnaire you can tell if you actually know if you're someone who's carbohydrate intolerant, like someone who's gluten intolerant. That means if they eat a lot of starch, if they have like 2 cups of rice, even if it's brown rice or 2 cups of beans, it can adversely affect their sugar. So I talk about like having less, like having smaller portions of beans and grains.
Sure.
And non-gluten grains in particular, because gluten can be very inflammatory for many people. I think for some people who don't react to it, it can be fine, but not in large amounts. And then I think meat is the big issue, right? So meat is the big issue. So should we be eating meat?
We just had dinner the other night.
Right.
We both had meat, right?
We had fish.
We had fish.
We had black cod.
Yes, that's
which was awesome.
I had a mahi. You had a black cod. Is that what it was?
Oh, you had I had the black cod.
Yeah.
I had the black cod. The guy next to me had meatballs.
Yeah. Guy next to me had carne asada.
But so the issues around meat also I think are everybody agrees, and fish. Everybody agrees that if anybody eats meat, it should be humanely raised. It should be sustainably raised. It should be grass-fed. It should be not harming the environment. The ethical and the environmental issues around animal eating are big and they're real.
Yeah.
I mean, I have many Buddhist patients. I have a Buddhist monk who's like an abbot who's is a diabetic, and he's never going to eat an animal. So I need to help him understand how he's never going to eat an egg, how to eat a higher fat protein diet, which is low glycemic.
Right.
So we can do that.
Okay.
Right. So more nuts and seeds. Less rice, more beans. Just there's strategies for doing that.
Sure.
And he did great. He lost 35 pounds, reversed his diabetes, and now I have tons of bun people, praying for me.
That's great.
Yeah, and then the meat thing is tricky because it's also an environmental risk. If you're eating factory farmed animals, there's antibiotics in that, and there's runoff from the pesticides and fertilizers that damages our water supply and rivers and lakes. There's climate change that happens from the methane produced. It's more toxic to the environment than carbon dioxide. There's high energy use. 1/5 of all our fossil fuels are used for growing animals for human consumption. Our water is being used up at incredible rates for feeding animals. There's basically I think 70% of all water use, and there's basically only 5% of the world's surface is fresh water.
It's usable.
Is fresh water.
Yeah.
Right, 1% is in Russia.
Wow.
And at least 4% for the rest of us, and 70% of that is being used for feeding animals for human consumption. So there's real environmental issues.
Sure.
So I think a factory farming should be not supported in any way, and we need to change that. And that means we need to change our patterns of consumption around meat. We need to downsize our meat consumption. I call it having condiment. Condiment, as opposed to like a condiment, like condiment. It should be a side dish or a dressing if you're going to eat it.
Sure.
And I think
not a full plate of steak. You mean?
I think there's 3 issues with meat, right? There's environmental issues, there's moral issues, and there's health issues. So we kind of talked about the moral. I think that's people are entitled to their beliefs, and they should be able to follow whatever they want and be healthy. The environmental issues are real, and I think everybody would agree, whether they're paleo-vegan, that we need to stop harming the environment. And I think even if you're not paleo-vegan, everybody really believes that. In fact, the Dietary Advisory Committee that was advising the government said we should limit meat consumption because of the environmental impact. Right now, if you have grass-fed meat, if you have sustainably raised meat, you can't. It's not as abundant. You can't produce as much, and so we all have to eat less of it. Right, and it's more expensive. So, but that's okay. And I think that from a health point of view, when I really looked at the literature, and I did this in Eat Fat Get Thin, I looked at all the research that I could find on meat because I'm like, well, I don't know.
You want to know for yourself too.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm recommending to my patients. I'm a human too, and I want to live a long time, and I don't want to be doing something stupid.
Yeah.
So I wanted to find out what does the science tell us about meat.
So you did all the research.
So I looked at all the research, and I wrote 8,000 words in the book on meat.
Wow.
There's a lot of research in there. And I addressed all these issues, environmental, moral, and the health issues were quite interesting. When we look at the studies on meat, and anybody can quote anything saying anything, right?
Right.
So you want the paleo people like, meat's healthy, here's all the research. And the vegan like, meat's going to kill you, here's all the research. Yeah. So it's like, and then you're at the average Joe, you're totally confused. and your average doctor, you're totally confused because we had no training in nutrition.
And they haven't done the research themselves.
No,
so they're going off of their opinion or their theory.
Yeah, they're like average people like the rest of us in terms of nutrition science. They don't know because it's not what we learn, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I just am at Cleveland Clinic, and we implemented a nutrition curriculum for the first time in the medical school. They have this integrated in, which is so great. And
that's awesome.
I helped Tim Ryan, who's a congressman from Ohio, introduce Tim. You love
great.
Tim. He's great. Has he been on the show?
He's been on here, yeah.
He's great. Introduce a bill called the Enrich Act, which was a bill that is funding $15 million to fund nutrition in medical schools, nutrition education for doctors.
Interesting. That's what we need the most because doctors,
a
lot of the time, I feel like could heal a lot of their patients
with
through food.
Oh my God. Well, food is the cause of most chronic disease. It's the cure for most chronic disease, and yet doctors know nothing about food.
And they just medicate a lot of the time.
I mean, listen, it's so bad. I mean, I use food as medicine. That's what food is the most powerful drug on the planet. I mean, that's why last week I was in Cleveland at the hospital teaching 300 black women how to cook in a cooking class. Like, that's what doctors should be doing because that's how I'm going to get people healthy.
That's real medicine, right?
That's real medicine.
Now, just a quick side note. What is your involvement with, what is functional medicine and what is your involvement at the Cleveland Clinic?
Can I finish my meat?
Yes, go ahead.
I was still rolling on the meat, and then we'll talk about functional medicine, and then we'll talk about Cleveland Clinic.
Perfect.
Because people want to know, like they're like, well, what about meat? They're like probably listening.
Let's do it.
So the science.
8,000 words.
I'm not going to give you 8,000 words, but I'll give you a few hundred.
Perfect.
So the science of meat was fascinating. So when I looked at the studies that showed it was harmful, here's what they were. They were mostly population studies, meaning they looked at groups of people, followed them, and then they asked questions of them. What did you eat last year? What did you eat last week? What did you last month? And they basically do these food frequency questionnaires, and then they correlate that with the risk of disease. And I try to control for all the confounding factors, but it's very tough. So the people who ate meat, they had more heart disease and more cancer and more death. But what else was?
They were smoking, they were drinking,
exactly.
they weren't sleeping,
right, exactly.
Stressed out.
So if you look at the data, they ate 800 more calories a day.
Yeah.
They almost ate no fruits and vegetables.
Tons of sugar.
They had tons of sugar and processed food, lots of fried foods. Drank more, smoked more, didn't exercise, and didn't take any vitamins and minerals. Well, guess what? They weren't as healthy as the other people. So most of the studies were like that. Now, there was a few studies that were interesting I found. One was a study of 11,000 people who shopped at health food stores. And they found there were like a lot of vegetarians and a lot of meat eaters. So who are the people who were, like healthy meat eaters who only eat grass-fed meat or who – because most of these studies were not on grass-fed meat either. They were on factory farm meat, right? So then again, how do you generalize that?
Sure.
But then there were these 11,000 people, and they followed them for many years, and they found that the meat eaters and the vegetarians, there was no difference in their health outcomes. Exactly the same. So if you're a meat eater who basically eats a healthy diet and has grass-fed meat versus a vegan or vegetarian, no difference in health outcomes.
And you have a healthy
lifestyle, then there's no difference. So there's other factors like how it affects your gut flora and so on, and I think, those are more complicated issues. I address all of them in the book, but at the end of the day, I think it's okay if you have no moral issues and you can eat sustainably raised meat and not in great quantities, and as part of your diet, I think it's okay.
So let's go back to diabetes for a second. Tell me again the stat on diabetes, how many people have it or are pre-diabetic, and what, I'm uneducated on this, so how many different types of diabetes are there, and how is it caused?
Okay. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. Pancreas fails. We used to be called juvenile diabetes, and you need insulin. You
need it.
You need insulin.
If you have type 1 diabetes, you need insulin.
You need insulin, yeah, because your pancreas dies. Because your pancreas makes insulin and helps your blood sugar get balanced. That's the blood. It's sort of the gatekeeper that lets the glucose into your cells.
Okay.
So it's really important.
So how does that die?
How do people die from that?
I mean, how does the pancreas die?
Oh, well,
how does it get to that point?
It's an autoimmune, like you get multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis. It's basically your body attacks your pancreas.
Is that from eating a lot of bad foods?
Well, there's been links to dairy and actually as a driver of type 1 diabetes. Gluten, 29% of people who have type 1 diabetes have celiac that are undiagnosed. So celiac is a big cause of autoimmune diseases, including type 1 diabetes. So that's a very small number of people, very few. 1 out of 2 Americans have what we call type 2 diabetes. We used to call it adult onset, except now kids as young as 3 are getting type 2 diabetes from drinking soda from the crib. I mean, Louis,
my gosh.
I was working when I was a resident in an urgent care center, and this woman comes in for back pain. She got her baby in a carriage, and I see her feeding this baby this brown liquid in a bottle who's 7 months old. And I'm like, what is
soda?
I'm like, what is that? She said, that's Coca-Cola.
No.
I said, why are you feeding your baby Coke? She said, well, He likes it.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, Liz, my wife showed me this video on social media the other day. It was of a baby, it looked like it was maybe 8 or 9 months old baby, having ice cream for the first time.
Oh.
Having sugar for the first time. And you watch the baby eat the ice cream.
I light up.
The eyes, and then the baby grabs the thing and stuffs it in his face. I was like, oh my God, it was just so crazy. And it's highly addictive. So so now we're seeing 1 in 2 Americans suffer from either prediabetes
Or type 2.
or type 2 diabetes. And that is when you eat too much sugar and starch. And every time you do that, it raises your insulin. Your body becomes resistant to the insulin, and so it doesn't work as well, so you need more insulin. And insulin does what? Insulin makes you hungry, it makes you store belly fat, it locks the fat in the fat cells, and it slows your metabolism. It's like a quadruple threat for your body to gain weight. So it's why we're seeing, and that goes back to what we're growing, right? So why are we eating all this food? It's because that's the food we produce, right? And so that's the other part of the problem. So we have the chronic disease, we have the economic impact, and then we're like, well, why do we have this food? So as a functional medicine doctor, I'm always asking why, right? Well, why are my patients sick?
Because it makes money, right?
Well, no, yeah, but I'm going even further. Why I got interested in this? Because why would a doctor care about agriculture and soil and all this crap? Because as I was thinking about my patients' diseases, most of them were caused by food and can be cured by food. So I'm thinking, well, if it's
how many are most of them? Is this like 50%, 70%? 80% of anyone that comes into the hospital or your patients who has some type of disease or some type of sickness.
I mean, unless it's like an environmental thing like mercury or Lyme or mold, most of the things.
Cancer.
Cancer is caused by food.
Really?
70%.
70% of cancer is caused by food.
And sugar is the number 1 culprit. Heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease, the big killers.
Are by sugar and food.
Yes.
So if you change your diet, you should be able to prevent
or cure sometimes.
Sometimes cure. Depends how far along things are, I guess.
Yeah.
But you can prevent heart disease, Alzheimer's.
100%. Yes, 100%. I mean, the studies are there.
It's crazy.
Even people who already have Alzheimer's, when they improve their diet, they can wake up
more
and get
functionality back.
So you've got me thinking, okay, well, if the patient's disease are caused by food, what's causing the food? It's the food system. And I'm like, well, what's causing the food system? It's our food policies. Like, what's causing our food policies? It's the food industry that's lobbying Congress.
It's got money.
It's the biggest lobby group in Congress is agriculture and food. By far, like by twice as much as the next lobby group.
By like gas and oil or whatever.
Yeah, exactly, right. And it's like, what? So then I began thinking, well, if I'm going to help my patients, I can't do it in my office. Like I can, it's like I'm like in the boat, bailing the boat with a hole instead of plugging the hole.
Right. You're not going to the source.
Right. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, what do I need to do as a functional medicine doctor? I need to go to the root cause, right? The root cause and why. And then it became clear to me that it's our agricultural system that's driving so much of the problem. And what we grow has been based on good intentions that were in the 50s and people were hungry. There wasn't enough food. There was a lot of poverty. And so we figured out a system to produce an abundance of starchy calories.
So we can have food.
So we can have food. And we were great at it. And we have cheap, abundant corn and wheat and soy, which are the commodity crops that are turned into industrial processed food, which is now 60% of our diet. And for every 10% of that you eat, your risk of death goes up by 14%.
Shut up.
Yeah, so you're
crazy.
So you're basically, feeding Americans a diet we know is going to kill them. The research is so clear on this. There's no scientific debate, and yet we don't do anything about it because we have these dysfunctional food policies. And then the way we grow the food causes climate change. And we'll get into that, but the number 1 cause of climate change is our food system.
Really?
People don't realize that. I didn't know it. I'm like, it's oil and gas and all this stuff. I'm like,
but what is it? Is it the trucking? Is it the animal feces?
End to end.
Is it
so first of all, deforestation is devastating. Not only do we destroy the soil on which we cut down the trees, but the trees are carbon sinks, so we lose that.
So they're not sucking in the bad air.
They're sucking in
putting
the
out
carbon
good
dioxide, right? I mean, basically, plants suck out carbon dioxide. That's what they breathe. We breathe oxygen; they breathe carbon dioxide. So that's a perfect antidote, right? Yeah. And then the soil also we're damaging by the way we're farming. We've lost 1/3 of our topsoil. It's responsible. Now, people don't know this, but of all the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the loss of soil, organic matter, like healthy, rich soil, is responsible for 30 to 40% of all greenhouse gases currently in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution.
Does that mean why is that? Does it
Okay,
like
why?
suck up? Does it suck?
Because soil it can hold more carbon than is in the atmosphere right now. There's a trillion tons of carbon in the atmosphere, which is a lot. I don't know, a trillion tons, I don't even know how to measure that. And the soil can hold 3 trillion tons of carbon. And how does it do that? It's an ancient carbon capture technology that is available all over the world, that's free that's can be more effective than all the rainforests on the planet, than all the forests and trees on the planet. It's called photosynthesis. If you have like grasslands, for example, like we had big prairies in the United States, they suck down carbon, they breathe it, and they put it through the plants into the roots, feeds the mycorrhizal fungi, which then make healthy soil, feeds the bacteria, and you get this incredibly rich live soil that holds tremendous amounts of organic matter that is carbon, right? I mean, carbohydrates comes from the word carbon, which comes from carbon dioxide, right? Ding, 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 it all connects. And,
interesting.
And so we've lost. So
if we don't have the soil for it to consume, then it just bounces off back into the air, I guess, and we're just consuming it in other ways.
Yeah, and the soil can hold so much carbon. The UN estimated that if we took the 5 million hectares of degraded farmland around the world, if we took just 2 million of that and spent 300 billion, which is the total military spend for 60 days around the world, which is not much. 60 days, 2 months of everybody's military spending. We literally could stall climate change by 20 years.
Wow.
Because of putting back the carbon in the soil. And not only that, it holds water. You see, in Iowa and in the Midwest, there was floods that just destroyed 1 million acres of cropland that otherwise could have been fine if the soil could hold the water, but it just sits on the top where it runs through, and we lose all this water. So that when you have organic matter in the soil, it holds 27,000 gallons for every 1% organic matter in the soil per acre. So it's an incredible water sink, it's a carbon sink, and we've lost all these soils, and it's because we're growing these commodity crops in ways that destroy soil. We're tilling the soil, we're turning over soil erosion, it runs off into the rivers. We kill all the life in the organic matter by poisoning it with fertilizer, with pesticides, with glyphosate, herbicides, and it's staggering. And then we have all these sort of unintended consequences. You know, we started growing all this food, and we thought this agricultural revolution was great. All these chemicals are great. You know, fertilizer's great. We can do all this good stuff. Tractors, big farms, more food, feed the world. It's backfired on us, and it's producing the worst food on the planet. That's causing devastating environmental damage, staggering climate change. So it's the soil loss, it's the deforestation, it's the factory farming of animals, which should be banned. It's the transportation, storage, refrigeration, and the food waste. I mean, food waste a
lot of waste.
Yeah, but we waste 40% of our food. We really
that's on our plate. We don't eat it.
Imagine going to the grocery store, buying a bunch of groceries, and getting home and throwing 40% in the garbage. The average Americans waste $1,800 of food a year, and it's about a pound a day, and that goes to landfills. The landfills, then it rots and creates methane. So you could be a vegan throwing out your food waste and scraps, and you could be contributing to climate change. If food waste were a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the US and China.
Wow.
Yeah, it's methane to produce, and we need to compost, we need to have community garden, like always to fix it. But it's like when you look at the whole end-to-end food system, it is the #1 source of climate change, about 50% of greenhouse gases. And people just don't appreciate that.
So why, I mean, if this information is public and it's out there and policy makers are aware of it, they're not aware of it.
No. I spent 2 hours on a sailboat this summer with a senator, a smart senator.
He wasn't aware of it.
And I literally, his jaw was hanging open the entire time.
Are they not presented with this research and information?
No,
because they got so much money sent to them by the lobbyists, probably.
Right. I mean, listen, if all the people who are walking their office are Monsanto and Cargill and McDonald's and Pepsi and they're all donating millions of dollars, I would say billions of dollars, they're not hearing the other side of the science. And how do you fight that? So I always deride at lobbyists, but I plan on I'm creating a food fix campaign, which is a nonprofit, along with an advocacy organization, to start to literally lobby senators, congressmen, key people in the administration around these issues and start to drive policy change.
Because in the UK, and you were talking about, I think in Australia, New Zealand, or I think in Asia, you were saying that you can't do certain things with the food, otherwise you'll go to prison, you'll go to, you'll get killed,
I mean,
like in the UK, they don't have a lot of these dyes, and, right?
Yeah, so it's so funny, the FDA, is so influenced by the food industry, and I was once with the former head of the Federal Drug Administration, Food and Drug Administration, Peggy Hammer. Former. She was, but then she was the FDA commissioner.
Yeah.
But now she's former. And I was at the World Economic Forum. I said, Peggy, how come we have so much trouble with getting advances in food labeling, or dealing with toxic chemicals in our food, or antibiotics in animal feed, or she's like, well, when we try to make too aggressive change, Congress threatens to shut down our funding because of the food lobby.
They threaten to shut it down?
Yeah.
And then what? If they shut it down, what would happen?
Well, they're limited in their ability to do their job. And so the FTC, the same thing happened. In the 70s, there was a movement by the Federal Trade Commission to have, negative education campaigns around sugar and how bad it was. But the Congress says, we're going to pull all your funding and shut you down if you do this. And so they pull back. So for example, you asked a question about Asia. We have this thing called GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe. So the food additives. We have thousands of food additives. Only about 5% have actually been tested for safety.
In the U.S.
Some of them are grandfathered in, right? Like so Crisco, for example, trans fat was grandfathered in as a safe food to eat. But it took 50 years for researchers to finally prove to the FDA that it wasn't safe, because it was the basis of all processed food, right? Crisco shortening. It shortens your life. It's like,
oh my gosh.
And so they literally had to be sued by a scientist in order to actually turn it into a non-safe substance. And then, of course, they gave the food industry years and years to get it out of the food. So but in this country, there's so many things that are used in our food supply that are banned in Europe, like BHT, butylated hydroxytoluene, food additives, various dyes, and something called azodicarbonamide, which is a softener that makes like bread more like fluffy and soft.
Yeah.
And it was used in Subway sandwich. Our friend Vani Hari outed them and said, "This is your yoga mat material in your Subway sandwich."
And they got it taken out, right?
Pretended to eat her, and she got it out. But the FDA still says it's fine to eat.
Right.
And in Singapore, if you use it and you're a food producer, you get a $450,000 fine and 15 years in jail for putting it in the food.
That same ingredient.
The same ingredient.
That anyone can use in the U.S. right now.
In the U.S., yes. And most of the things that are safe, quote, safe here are banned in Europe. So it's like, yeah, they're not doing their job. And then antibiotics, we have 30 million pounds of antibiotics are used in animal feed. We have about 37 million total. So about 7 million for humans to treat disease and 30 million for animals. Why? For growth. It's a growth factor.
Right.
It makes them fat. And it makes humans fat too. And it is used for prevention from overcrowding. And the FDA says, well, this isn't a good idea. I mean, nobody thinks it's a good idea. Mm-hmm. But they go, well, would you pretty please not do it? It was a voluntary guideline that the FDA produced, not mandatory.
Please don't do it, yeah.
You have to have a vet certify that the animal's sick before you give them antibiotics.
Oh, man.
And now they continue to do it and just laugh. They had voluntary, the FTC put in voluntary guidelines around junk food marketing. Would you pretty please not advertise the bad stuff and advertise more good stuff? It was just voluntary, and the food industry went ballistic and had it overturned. So even the voluntary guidelines are nullified.
Like, no, wow.
And
sugar, it's like, I'm the first one to raise my hand when I say, like, I love sugar. And it's my biggest vice, right? Like, I love cookies and candies and cakes and brownies and anything you can think of. I love it, right?
We programmed.
I don't know why I don't have diabetes. So much sugar I've had my whole life. But
you can't be having that much because you look pretty good.
Well, I train hard too, right? I go through waves. But as a kid, I would drink like 9, 10 Dr. Peppers a day, I remember.
What?
Like some days in the summer, you're just sitting
Could have
around.
been president. Isn't that what our president?
Exactly. But I would run around and work out and play sports, but then I would just drink because I thought that's
But
what was on TV.
you were 16, 18. You're like.
And I was like 9, 10, right? So I was like, but it was, you'd see it on commercials like your NBA superstar drinking Dr. Pepper or Sprite or whatever after on the basketball court. And I don't know if it was just like subconscious or just it tasted good and you didn't think about it.
This is where the food industry is so, I talk about it in my book, Food Fix, but the food industry is so strategic about how it advances its mission and goals. And it does it through multiple channels. And I'm just going to go through them because people just don't know. The
Celebrity endorsements, right?
Yeah, the first, obviously, celebrity endorsements, which is the obvious one. They co-opt social groups. So they fund groups like the NAACP and Hispanic Federation. The African American and Latino communities are the most affected by diabetes and obesity, and they co-opt them by funding them. I want to show the movie Fed Up at the King Center in Atlanta, and Bernice King, Martin Luther King's daughter, was all about it, and she was excited. But once we got it scheduled, a few days later, I got a call that we couldn't show it. I'm like, why? She says, because Coca-Cola funds the King Center.
No.
Yeah. I went to Spelman College, which is African American Women College in Atlanta, and the dean said to me, half of the 18-year-olds coming into college have a chronic illness, obesity, hypertension, diabetes. 18-year-old women. And I'm like, why is there soda machines all over the campus? Why? It's just because Coke funds.
No.
And one of the people on the board of trustees is one of the highest executives at Coca-Cola.
Oh man.
An African American woman. It's like, so they co-opt social groups. And that's why they, for example, oppose soda taxes, because they're in the funding of these big soda companies. And then, of course, they fund research. So they fund 12 times as much research, $12 billion worth of research a year to study nutrition. So Gatorade gets studied by Pepsi.
Really?
Gatorade's the best thing in the world. It's not. It's just sugar, right? Or
right.
So it corrupts and pollutes science. So people are confused. Why is there so much confusion about nutrition science? Third, they create front groups. Call them spin doctors. So they create front groups that seem like they're independent groups, like Crop Life.
Yeah.
Or like
and they're tweeting
the Center for Consumer Freedom.
Right.
Or the American Council on Science and Health, which, by the way, is run by a bunch of doctors who suggest that pesticides are safe, that high fructose corn syrup is great for you, that smoking doesn't cause disease, and
why would they do that? Because they get paid a lot?
They're funded by Monsanto and Big Food and Pepsi. You just look at their funders, and they spend $30 million fighting GMO labeling in California. This front group, it was all funded by Monsanto, right? And then you got these front groups, and then you have them co-opting scientists and academies. So the nutrition academies, the American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, their funding in large part comes from industry. And so the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is our main nutrition association, 40% of their funding comes from the food industry. They have sponsored, lectures at their meetings that are, with people saying, well, high fructose corn syrup is good and diet drinks are good, and
right.
It's just completely corrupted. And so these professional societies give guidelines, and they're corrupt. And Dr. Ioannidis from Stanford, who's a scientist who looks carefully at the research and conflicts of interest, says, these professional societies like the American Heart Association and Diabetes Association should not be making guidelines. And then, so you've got all these ways in which they sort of screw things up. And then, of course, they are aggressive in advertising and marketing, which is illegal in most countries. And then they have lobbyists running around Washington driving policy that supports all of what they do. So you've got this massive effort.
Thank you so much for watching this video. And if you're looking for more greatness in your life, then check out this next video right here.
Mold, most of the things. Cancer is caused by food.
Really?
70%.
70% of cancer is caused by food.
And sugar is the number one culprit. Heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's,